All right, man, we back. What if Goku landed in the boys' dark version? This episode 4. We're going to title it what? The Unlikely Apprentice. Have I been titling videos for this? What? Anyway, shout out to the members: Jason 57835, John Lane 2016, OD Demon Wolf, and Quade Moke. I think I just got a new member, so I'm gonna have to change the image and update this. But anyway, let's continue on. All right, let's get to it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sterile hum that penetrated Annie's skull like a dentist's drill through enamel. She surfaced from unconsciousness slowly, her body reporting damage in waves, the dull throb of her jaw, the sharp ache in her ribs, the tender puffiness of her split lip, where the skin had been clumsily sealed by a Vought medic. The infirmary cot was stiff beneath her, the pillow thin and utilitarian, hard to say that word. Comfort was not a priority in Vought's medical wing, only functionality. A nurse in pale blue scrubs appeared at her bedside, her face professionally neutral as she checked the monitors beeping beside Annie's head. "You're awake," the woman stated, making a note on her tablet. "Good. Your vitals stabilized 4 hours ago. Minor concussion, 3 cracked ribs, significant soft tissue damage to the abdomen." She paused, her pen hovering. "Mr. Apex left instructions before he departed." Annie turned her head too quickly, and the room swam. She winced, pressing a hand to her temple. "He left instructions." The nurse's expression didn't change, but something seemed to flicker in her eyes. A micro expression of unease quickly suppressed. "He said to tell you not to worry about finding him." She consulted her tablet, reading directly. Quote, "She will not need to find me. I will find her. Rest, heal. The training begins when I decide it begins, not before." End quote. Annie's throat tightened. It wasn't really a promise or an invitation. It was more like a summons, a declaration of authority that brooked no room for argument. She wasn't being given a choice. The training was happening, whether she was ready for it or not. The nurse finished her notes and stepped back. "You're cleared to leave when you feel able. There's a change of clothes in the locker by the door." She paused at the threshold. "For what it's worth, no one here has ever seen him agree to train anyone before. Whatever you did in that assessment room made some sort of impact. But word of advice, just be careful." Then the door slid shut. Annie was alone with the buzzing lights and the weight of a seemingly emotionless monster's conditional attention. For the future, of course. Then we spin back to earlier. The corridors of the assessment facility were still echoing with the aftermath of the morning events when Kakarot emerged from the training chamber. Technicians averted their eyes, security personnel stepped aside without being asked. The invisible wake of his passage left silence in its path, a bubble of quiet in the bustling facility. He found a floor supervisor in the primary control room, a harried woman named Chen, who had been monitoring the assessment from behind reinforced glass. She went pale when he entered the room. Her hand instinctively reached for the panic button beneath her console before she caught herself. "I am going to see San Edgar," Kakarot said without preamble. "Before I do, you will ensure something." Chin nodded rapidly, her throat working. Of course. Anything." "The decision I made regarding the candidate, my agreement to train her, will not be discussed with anyone outside this facility." His dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. "Not your colleagues in other departments, not your superiors outside this chain of command, and not your friends, and not your family. Not the cleaning staff, and not any soup who even asks. The only person who will receive this information will be from me, and it will be Stan Edgar. Personally, from me." Chen's hands trembled against her console. Understood. Full information on lockdown. I'll personally scrub the automated reports, and you will do whatever is necessary." Kakarot interrupted, his voice flat. "If I discover that this information has reached anyone other than Edgar through channels outside my control, I will return to this facility personally, and it will not be for another assessment." He didn't need to elaborate because he didn't have to. The threat hung in the air between them, cold and absolute. "Yes, consider it done," Chin whispered. Kakarot turned and walked out, already dismissing her from his thoughts. The information suppression wasn't paranoia, it was efficiency. The less Vought's internal factions knew about his activities, the less they would interfere with his plans. And the last thing he wanted was a line of weaklings and sycophants asking for training lessons, now that word got out that he was taking in students, apparently. The elevator ride to Stan Edgar's office was silent, the polished chrome walls reflecting Kakarot's impassive face back at him in fragments. He had intended this to be a private conversation, the announcement of his decision to take an apprentice delivered to Edgar alone, with no witnesses to eavesdrop on the message. But the universe, as always, seemed to have other plans. The door slid open, and Kakarot stepped into the executive suite to find that he was not Edgar's only guest. Victoria Newman sat in one of the leather chairs, facing the massive desk with her legs crossed, with a glass of water in her hand. She looked up as he entered, her smile polite and utterly unreadable. The expression of a woman who had learned long ago to show nothing genuine in public. Edgar, behind his desk, did not rise. His gaze flicked from Newman to Kakarot, a subtle calculation happening behind his calm brown eyes. "Apex," he said. "I was just discussing the quarterly projections with Miss Newman. Your timing is coincidental." "Convenient," Newman corrected lightly, taking a sip of her water. "Given how rarely you seek out this office, unsummoned, that is. I assume something must have happened at the assessment this morning." Her eyes glittered with curiosity, carefully masked. "Were any of your candidates satisfactory?" Kakarot stood in the center of the room, incandescent between Edgar and Newman. Equidistant between Edgar and Newman, and made a decision. He had intended to tell only Edgar, but Newman was already here, and Newman was Edgar's most trusted political operative anyway, his scalpel in a world of legislation and public opinion. So if he was going to train this girl, if he was going to reshape her into a real weapon of Vought, then Newman would inevitably become aware of it anyway. Better to control the narrative from the very beginning, he said inwardly. "Yes, the candidate's name is Annie January," Kakarot said, his voice flat. "Soup named Starlight. Her power output is below acceptable thresholds for the Seven. Her combat instincts are unrefined. Her psychological profile is soft, to say the least." Newman raised an eyebrow. Then she'll be rejected. That's a routine outcome. Why does it require a personal visit to, because I'm going to train her?" He interrupted. The words hung in the air. Newman's glass paused halfway to her lips. Edgar's fingers stopped their rhythmic tapping on his desk. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them spoke. Newman recovered first, setting down her glass with a deliberate care. "Train her?" she repeated slowly. "You? Apex? A man who has never trained anyone, who has never even shown the slightest interest in mentorship, who has dismissed almost every soup who ever sought his favor as weak, insignificant, inefficient. You want to train this girl?" "Yes." Edgar leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Explain." Kakarot met his gaze without flinching. "She crawled toward me after I put her on the floor and asked. Every other soup I've assessed has either begged for mercy or fled. She asked me to make her stronger, not for fame, not for approval. She wants to earn her strength." A pause. "That is the first interesting thing I have heard from a Vought asset in years." Newman and Edgar exchanged a glance, a silent conversation conducted in microseconds, the language of people who had navigated corporate warfare together for a decade. "You believe she has potential," Newman said. It wasn't a question. "I believe she has grit," Kakarot corrected. "Potential is theoretical. Her determination shows some promise. The rest can be forged through sufficient pressures." Edgar was quiet for a long moment, his fingers finally resuming their rhythm on the desk. You've never asked for anything before," he said slowly. "Not resources, not personnel, not accommodations. You've accepted every mission, every assessment, every assignment, without comment. And now you're asking for what? Permission?" "I'm simply informing you," Kakarot said. What I do with my downtime is my own affair. But you should be aware that the asset you call Starlight will be undergoing a significant transformation in these coming months. Her value to the company may increase accordingly. A ghost of a smile, barely a twitch, crossed Edgar's lips. And if your transformative actions destroy her, what then? Kakarot's dark eyes held no mercy. Then she was never worth training in the first place. Newman picked up her glass again, her smile returning, sharper, now more genuine. Well, she said, this should be interesting to watch. Apex taking on a protege. The corridors of Vought haven't had this much entertainment since human rights lawsuits. Edgar waved a hand in dismissal. Do what you want with the girl. He turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving the two architects of Vought's leadership alone with their thoughts and the unsettling knowledge that one of the corporation's most dangerous weapons had just developed an unexpected new interest. Behind him, Newman took a long sip of her water. I almost feel sorry for the girl, she murmured. Edgar didn't look up from his tablet. No, you don't. No, Newman agreed. I don't. A week had passed since the assessment, 7 days of ice packs and heating pads, of her mother's anxious hovering and the dull ache of ribs that still protested sudden movements. Annie sat on the back porch of their modest Virginia home, watching the sunset over the neighbor's fence, and tried to quiet the war that was raging inside her chest. The physical healing was almost complete. Vought's medics were efficient, if not warmed, but the memory of that room lingered like a bruise on her psyche. The backhand that had sent her spinning, the punch that had collapsed her lungs, the way Apex had walked away from her broken body as if she was already forgotten. Be careful, the nurse had said. No one here has ever seen him agree to train anyone before. Annie touched her side where the ribs had been cracked. The pain was gone now, and it was replaced by a strange, hollow anticipation. She had asked for this after all. She had crawled across a cold floor, bloody and bruised, and begged one of the most dangerous men in Vaught's shadow arsenal to make her stronger. What kind of person did that even make her? The rational part of her brain, the part that sounded like her mother, like her old youth pastor, like every sensible voice she had ever known, whispered that she should be terrified. And she was. Every night she dreamed of his dark, expressionless eyes, the casual brutality of his assessment. Every morning she woke up with a heart pounding, grateful that he hadn't appeared in the doorway to target her. But beneath the fear, something else pulsed, something quieter, something almost like pride. The first person that he ever chose to train. No one else. Not the famous heroes of the Seven, not the corporate darlings with their $1 million smiles. Her. Annie January, the girl from Virginia who could make her hands glow. He had seen something in her desperate crawl across that floor, something that made him pause, that made him even smirk. Maybe even a smile. He had offered his hand. She didn't know if she was brave or foolish. She didn't know if this training would forge her into something stronger or shatter her completely. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, Annie made her peace with uncertainty. He would find her. He had promised. And when he did, she would be ready. Or as ready as anyone could be to face the shadow of Vought, that is. Then one day the knock came. At precisely around 7:15 in the morning on the 8th day, Annie was still in her pajamas and an old flannel set, mismatched socks, her hair tangled nest from sleep, when she heard her mother's voice from the living room, bright and welcoming in a particular way that her mother had with an unexpected guest. "Oh, well, aren't you a tall drink of water? Come in, come in. Don't mind the mess. Annie, company." Her blood turned ice. She knew. Before she rounded the corner, before she saw the familiar silhouette through the hallway doorway, she already knew. Apex sat on the kitchen table as if he had always been there. He wore civilian clothes, a simple black jacket over a gray shirt, dark jeans, boots that looked more functional than fashionable. Honestly, I could have put that. I got him in his regular suit. Oh well. But nothing could disguise what he was. The weight of his presence pressed against the walls, making the cheerful morning light seem somehow lesser. Donna January was oblivious to the predator that was in her kitchen, as she was mid-ramble. And she was always such a bright child. You know, the pageants, the talent shows, she just shone. I told her, I said, Annie, God gives you a gift like that. You don't hide it under a bushel. You let it shine. Are you sure I can't get you some coffee, some breakfast? You look like you don't eat enough, if you don't mind my saying. Annie gasped, a small involuntary sound that caught in her throat and escaped before she could stop it. Apex's dark eyes shifted to her. He did not rise. He did not smile. He simply observed. How did you find me? Annie whispered, her hands gripping the door frame. He tilted his head as if the question confused him. I could find anyone, he said, his voice flat and certain. Eventually. Donna laughed, a warm, unbothered sound that made Annie want to scream. Oh, honey, the rumors on the news say the same thing. Vought Shadow. They call you the man who sees everything. She beamed at Apex, completely unaware that she was hosting a deadly weapon. It's so nice that Annie is making friends in the company. She's been so nervous about the whole hero thing. Apex stood up. The motion was unhurried, almost lazy, but Donna's words died in her throat. Some primal instinct buried beneath her small-town friendliness finally began to flicker to life. Annie and I were leaving now, he said, not a question and not a request, just a statement that was flat and absolute. He walked toward the front door, passing within inches of Annie without so much as a glance, no acknowledgement, no greeting, no explanation, just the back of his black jacket moving through the doorway and onto the morning light. Annie stood frozen, her heart hammering against her healing ribs. Her mother looked from the empty doorway to her daughter's pale face. Annie, what's going on? Why is he here? She didn't have an answer, or rather she had too many answers, none of which would make her mother understand, so she simply grabbed her white outfit from the hook by the door, which was probably inadequate for what she was walking into, and followed the shadow outside. Apex was already standing by a black SUV, the engine running, the back door open. He still wasn't looking at her. Get in, he said, and then Annie got in. They rode in silence until Apex saw a large, vacant, worn-down building and told the driver to pull over, and they wandered inside it. The abandoned building swallowed them whole. Annie's boots crunched on the broken glass and debris as the door slammed shut behind her, plunging the interior into absolute blackness. Not a single sliver of light penetrated the boarded windows. The air was thick with dust, mold, and the metallic scent of rusted metal, and somewhere in the suffocating void, Apex was already gone in the shadows. First test, his voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, seemingly at once, bouncing off walls that she couldn't even see. Combat awareness and adaptability in low visibility conditions. Your task is simple. Find me. Annie's hands trembled as she caught up her light, just a faint glow at first, enough to illuminate the immediate space. Crumbled drywall, graffiti taggings, and overturned shopping carts. But no Apex. Your powers, he continued, voice shifting left, then right, then above. You rely on the light of them too heavily. Light can highlight, but it also announces your position. Every time you glow, you tell every enemy in range exactly where you are, and in response, exactly where to attack. Then a blur of motion from her blind spot. She spun, throwing a hasty energy burst, but the beam cut through empty air, illuminating nothing but dust motes dancing in its path. Something hard and precise slammed into her kidney from the opposite direction. She gasped, stumbling forward, her light flickering, too slow and too predictable. And you're more than your light. Another strike, her shoulder, this time. A jolt of pain radiating down her arm. She tried to expand her light into a full spear, a dome of illumination that would leave no shadows to hide in, and for a moment the entire ground floor blazed with a golden radiance. But it was empty. No Apex, no footprints, no sign he had ever even been there. Then her light dimmed, and the darkness rushed back in like a living thing, and something moved right behind her again. This was supposed to be easy, Annie had thought, naively, foolishly. That light was the obvious counter to darkness, that she could simply illuminate the battlefield and remove every hiding place, that finding one man in an abandoned building would be child's play. She had never been so wrong. Apex moved like smoke through crevices of the building. Every time she lit a section of the building, he was already gone, a flicker of motion at the edge of her peripheral vision, a whisper of displaced air behind her back. and then the jabs would begin again, quick, precise, and brutal. Her ribs ached where old cracks were still healing, and her kidneys were throbbing. Her thighs burned from the impact of close fist strikes delivered from impossible angles. He wasn't trying to knock her unconscious. He was educating her. Every blow was a lesson in her own inadequacy. Is starlight more than a flashlight? His voice hissed from her left. She spun, light blazing. Empty. A fist slammed into her right kidney. Then his palm drove into her solar plexus and she collapsed to her knees, gasping, her light guttering out. She tried to stand. Another jab to her thigh sent her back down. The darkness pressed in around her, absolute and suffocating, and for the first time since she had crawled across that assessment room floor, Annie January wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Annie's knees pressed into the debris-strewn concrete. Her breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness was absolute now. She had let her light die completely, too exhausted to maintain even a flicker. Apex's voice had gone silent, which somehow made everything worse. He was watching, waiting, circling like the predator that he was. You rely on your light too heavily. His words echoed in her skull. For the first time, she actually began to listen. Light wasn't all there was to her powers, after all. She closed her eyes. Not that it mattered in the pitch black, and forced herself to stop panicking, to stop reacting, to feel. Her powers could feel and feed off electricity, but she had always focused on the output aspect, the blast, the light, the visible manifestations of her soup gift. What about the other direction? She reached out with her senses, not her eyes. The building hummed faintly with residual power, dead circuits, corroded wiring, the ghost of electricity long since drained. But there was something else, something closer, a small, concentrated source of energy, pulsing with weak but distinct signals. Within Apex's pocket. A cell phone. She didn't know if it would work. She had never tried anything like this before. But as Apex shifted somewhere in the darkness, his weight transferring, his boots scraping against broken glass, Annie focused everything she had on the tiny device. Connect. The phone vibrated once, then again, and suddenly she could feel it. Not just its location, but its position relative to her body. A beacon in the darkness screaming its coordinates directly into her own awareness. He was 3 meters to her left, crouched behind a collapsed support beam, preparing to strike again. Annie's eyes snapped open. Her light erupted not in a blind sphere, but in a focused lance aimed directly at the phone's signal. The beam caught Apex mid-crouch, illuminating his surprised expression in stark white relief. For a single heartbeat, he was frozen. Not in fear, but in genuine astonishment. Then Annie was moving. She came up in a defensive stance, her light now steady glow around her body rather than a beacon announcing her own position. Found you, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The silence stretched between them. Apex straightened, slowly brushing dust from his jacket. His dark eyes studied her with the intensity that made her skin prickle. Then his lips curved. Not the predatory smirk from the assessment room, something else. Something also almost resembling approval. Clever, he said. Not a compliment, more like an acknowledgement of fact. You stopped trying to overpower the problem and started thinking around it, using your abilities I didn't predict. He stepped closer and Annie forced herself not to flinch. He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the faint static electricity still crackling in his dark hair from the residual energy she had illuminated him with. You have finished your first lesson. This session is over. Annie looked down at herself at the fresh bruises blooming on her arms, the cut on her forehead she hadn't even noticed, the torn sleeve of her white outfit. She was a mess, but she was still standing. Does that mean I passed? She asked. Apex turned and walked toward a sliver of light penetrating through a boarded window. Correct, he said without looking back. He paused at the doorway, his silhouette a black cutout against the gray light. The car will take you back home. Then he was gone, leaving Annie alone in the ruins surrounded by darkness and the faint lingering scent of blood. She touched her bleeding forehead and smiled, a small, exhausted, genuine thing. I actually found him. The black SUV hummed through the Virginia countryside, its tinted windows turning the morning light into something muted and artificial. Annie sat in the back seat, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass, bruised, battered. Her white outfit was torn and dusted with debris from the abandoned building. She was smiling. I actually found him. The words replayed in her mind like a victory chant. She had adapted. She had improvised. She had used her powers in a way she never had before, turning a cell phone signal into a beacon. Apex had called her clever. Not praise exactly. She wasn't naive enough to think he handed out compliments freely, but acknowledgement, recognition. You stopped trying to overpower the problem. She pressed her fingers to the cut on her forehead, wincing at the sting. The first lesson was now over. She had survived. More than that, she had grown. The smile lingered warm and genuine as the SUV pulled onto her street. Annie January smiled in the back of a black SUV, believing she had taken her first step towards becoming a real hero. She had no idea she had just taken her first step into a darkness far deeper than any abandoned building could contain, and the name of that darkness was Vought. Kakarot moved through the night like a phantom, his boots finding purchase on ledges and fire escapes that shouldn't have been able to support his density. The city sprawled beneath him, a patchwork of neon and shadow, of weak things pretending at strength. He had dismissed the driver blocks ago, preferring the solitude of rooftops to the confinement of a vehicle. She found me. The thought circled his mind like a hawk surveying prey, refusing to settle into easy categorization. He had designed the test to break her, not physically, but psychologically. The absolute darkness, the relentless assault from unseen angles, the deliberate targeting of her existing injuries. Most soups he had subjected to similar evaluations had either frozen in panic or lashed out blindly until exhaustion forced submission. Annie January, however, Starlight, had done neither. She stopped producing light and started sensing for electricity. He landed on a water tower, perching on its curved surface as he replayed the moment in his head. The cell phone in his pocket, a standard VOD-issue device, encrypted, shielded, utterly unremarkable, had become her beacon. She hadn't just illuminated the darkness, she had felt him through it, using an aspect of her powers he hadn't even seen her demonstrate during the initial assessment. I should have anticipated this. The admission was rare for him. Kakarot hardly ever made mistakes. He did not repeat them. But this oversight rankled during their first encounter, when she had blasted him with everything she possessed. The building's lights had flickered and shattered. The power draw had been immense, yes, but he had dismissed it as simple energy discharge, a byproduct of her attack rather than the evidence of a deeper electrical sensitivity that she possessed. She wasn't just outputting energy, she was drawing it in. His dark eyes narrowed, staring at the city lights without seeing them. The implications were significant. If Annie January could sense electrical currents, could she manipulate them in some way? Could she drain power grids the way she had drained the assessment room circuits? Could she feel the bioelectric signals of living beings, heartbeats, nerve impulses, the subtle crackle of a nervous system preparing for fight or flight? Potential, he thought, the word no longer theoretical. Real potential. He had taken her as a student expecting to forge raw determination into functional strength, but this was adaptation. This creative application of powers he hadn't realized she possessed suggested that there was something more with this person. She wasn't just grit and stubbornness, she had an innovative instinct. Interesting, he thought again, and the word carried more weight than it had in years. The smile that had curved his lips in that abandoned building, the one she had mistaken for approval, returned, smaller now and more private. It wasn't approval he had felt in that moment. It was anticipation. The same anticipation a warrior felt when discovering a worthy sparring partner or a worthy opponent. The same hunger he experienced before a mission that might actually challenge him. The same feeling he felt when Maeve had broken his nose all those years ago. She adapted. She improvised. She grew. In the sterile halls of Vought, surrounded by soups who had been handed their powers in a syringe and expected applause for simply existing, he had forgotten what genuine growth looked like. Annie January had reminded him. This is why I agreed to train her. Not because she was strong, not because she was special, because she was hungry. Hungry in the way that he was hungry. desperate in a way that only those who had tasted their own limits could be desperate. She had crawled across the floor with cracked ribs and a bleeding lip, not because she wanted fame or fortune, but because she wanted to become someone better. Let's see what you become, Starlight. He pushed off the water tower, resuming his rooftop journey toward Vought Tower. The night was still young, and he had reports to file, reports that would carefully omit the details of her adaptation. That would present her progress as satisfactory, but unremarkable. The less Vought's internal factions knew about her potential, the less they might try to interfere. She is mine to shape now, no one else's. The territorial thought surprised him. He examined it briefly, found it logical, and filed it away. She was his student, his project, his investment, and just like his mentor Stan Edgar, Kakarot protected his investments. Kakarot landed in the shadow of Vought Tower's service entrance, the building's massive form blocking out the stars. He was reaching for the access panel when the voice came from above, carrying the particular timbre of forced casualness that always meant the speaker was performing, even when no audience was visible. Well, well, the shadow returns to his cave. He looked up. Homelander hovered 20 feet above the ground, his cape billowing in the night breeze, his perfect smile gleaming even in the dim light. He descended slowly, deliberately, the way he always did, as if gravity itself was honored to release him. His blue eyes swept over Kakarot's civilian clothes, the dust from the abandoned building, the faint traces of dried blood that clearly wasn't his own. Late night, huh? Homelander observed, landing on the service platform with theatrical grace. Out for a stroll? Or did Edgar finally give you something interesting to do? His smile widened, but his eyes remained sharp, calculating. He had been watching, waiting, curious. Kakarot met his gaze without expression. I was conducting an assessment. An assessment? Homelander rolled the words around like he was tasting them. At this hour? In that part of the city? He gestured vaguely toward the industrial districts, his cape swirling with emotion. The new candidate, the light girl. I heard she was underwhelming. He already knows, Kakarot thought. The information suppression had held, and Chim had done her job, which means that Homelander was fishing, not confirming. He probably heard rumors, perhaps, or he had simply deduced that Kakarot's absence from Vought Tower meant he was occupied into something and looked up my recent missions that weren't classified. She was adequate, Kakarot said flatly. Not for the 7 as of yet, but Edgar will assign her elsewhere. Homelander's eyes narrowed slightly, the only crack in his performance. Adequate? That's high praise coming from you. I don't think I've ever heard you call anyone adequate. He stepped closer, invading Kakarot's personal space with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been refused entry. What brought you out this late, huh? You don't usually handle rejections personally. That's what the HR drones are for. Kakarot held his ground. The mission required direct observation. Direct observation. Homelander's smile returned, sharper now. You know, for a guy who never explains himself, Apex, you sure do say a lot of words that don't mean anything. He circled Kakarot slowly, his cape brushing against the concrete. But I've known you since we were kids, Apex. I can tell when you're hiding something. He can't. Kakarot thought cold certainly. He never could. He sees what he wants to see, not what's in front of him. So he thought. I'm not hiding anything, Kakarot said. I assessed the candidate. She was not suitable for your team. At this moment, this matter is closed. The matter is closed. Homelander stopped circling, positioning himself directly in Kakarot's path to the service entrance. My team, he repeated, testing the words. You know, the 7, my team. You know, you could have been on my team, founding member, right beside me. His voice softened, almost plaintive beneath the bravado. But you chose this. Running errands in the dark, assessing nobodies in abandoned buildings. He followed me. The realization settled in Kakarot's mind with cold clarity. Homelander hadn't deduced anything he had observed, maybe from the air, maybe through surveillance feeds. Kakarot hadn't considered. However, he had done it. He knew more than he was letting on. I don't care about her, Kakarot said. And the statement was true, or as true as anything that he felt currently. I care about what she could have become. He said that part in his mind. I care about what she could become. He said that part in his mind. Then Kakarot placed his hand on the scanner before Homelander could respond. The door hissed open. Good night, Homelander. Good night, buddy. The door closed between them, and Kakarot descended into the depths of the tower, leaving the blonde-haired hero in quotes, alone on the service platform with his thoughts and the unsettling certainty that his oldest connection was keeping something secret. Behind him, Homelander's smile finally faded. So that'll be this at the end of this episode. I decided that this is going to be like an origin season, and then my season 1 will be like the season 1 of the boys. That's what I've decided to do with this. This is kind of a weird what if that I've done. I don't really have a genuine plan, so to speak. I have a couple of ideas, but nothing concrete. Also, I enjoyed drawing Starlight in regular civilian clothes. I thought that was kind of cool. But and I decided to give her where is it at? This outfit for now. But her, whenever we get to the season 1, you know, the boys, what if, right? Where Starlight actually joins the 7, I'm going to give her this outfit, you know, the one similar to the one in the show. So, you know, let me know what you guys think in the comment section as always. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.